Picture the Onon River Valley in the year 1162. Snow still sits on the peaks of the Khenti Mountains. Inside a felt tent, a woman named Holin holds a newborn boy, and his tiny fist is closed around a dark clot of blood. Mongol custom read that as a warning sign. This child would spill blood for the rest of his life. They named him Temujin, after a Tatar chief his father had just captured in battle that same week. Nobody standing in that tent could have guessed this infant would one day rule more territory than Rome ever held at its peak. That ending sits decades away. Right now he's a boy with a rough start, and the rough start is where the real story begins. The Mongolian steppe in the 1160s had no single ruler. Dozens of clans and tribes moved across the grasslands with their herds, fighting over pasture, horses, and old blood debts that stretched back generations. Temujin's father, Yesugei, led the Borjigin clan, a minor power squeezed between bigger rivals. Tatars controlled the plains to the east. Merkits held the forest to the north. Karaits and Naimans ruled the west with far larger armies than Yesugei could ever field. The Karait Khanate alone could put tens of thousands of riders in the field, armed with composite bows built from layered wood, horn, and sinew that could kill at 200 paces. Next to a kingdom like that, the Borjigin clan barely registered. Boys on the steppe learned to ride before they could properly walk and shoot a bow from horseback by the age of 5, since a family's survival depended on every hand pulling its weight during a hunt or a raid. Loyalty rarely outlasted a single chief's lifetime, so when Temujin turned 9, Yesugei rode him out to the camp of a chief named Day Sechin and betrothed him to Day Sechin's daughter, a girl named Börte. Custom required the boy to stay behind and work for his future father-in-law until the wedding. Yesugei left his son at that camp and turned for home alone. He never made it back. On the ride home, Yesugei stopped at a Tatar camp along the way. Steppe hospitality law required him to eat with whoever offered food, even old enemies. Someone at that fire recognized him from a raid years earlier and slipped poison into his meal. Yesugei made it 3 more days before the sickness dropped him. He staggered home, barely able to sit his horse, sent a rider to fetch his son back from Day Sechen's camp, and died within days of arriving. The year was 1171. Temujin was 9 years old, and he was now, in name only, head of a family with no army, no herds worth defending, and no allies willing to risk anything for a child. A rival chief named Targutai Kiriltuk from the Taichiud clan decided a 9-year-old boy commanded no real loyalty. He rode off with the family's herds and most of its followers, leaving Holun alone with 7 children, including 2 half-brothers from Yesugei's second wife. A widow with no herd on the Mongolian steppe faced a slow death sentence, since status and survival both ran on livestock. Holun kept her children alive on wild onions, roots, marmots, and fish pulled from the Onon River. Wealth on the steppe was counted in horses and sheep. This family had none of it, and every season for years they survived anyway on what the riverbank gave them. It was during these lean years that Temujin met a boy his own age named Jamukha from the Jadaran clan. On a frozen stretch of the Onon River, the two traded a knucklebone used for children's games, and a season later they traded arrows, one carved from horn. Under steppe custom, that exchange made them Anda, sworn brothers by choice rather than blood, a bond considered stronger than most family ties. Neither boy could have guessed how much that friendship would cost them both 20 years later. Survival on so little sharpens people, and sometimes it turns them cruel. Temujin's half-brother Begder had started asserting himself as head of the household, claiming the best cuts of whatever the boys caught. A dispute broke out first over a fish, then over a lark one of the younger brothers had shot down. Begder took both by force. Temujin and his full brother Kasar tracked him to a hillside where he sat watching the horses, one approaching from the front and one from behind, and shot him with arrows before he could reach for his own bow. Temujin was around 14. According to the secret history of the Mongols, Hoyland tore into him afterward, comparing her sons to 5 wild animals turning on each other rather than facing outside enemies together. The rebuke landed, but the lesson underneath it stuck too. On the steppe, a threat got removed early, even one sitting inside your own family. Word reached Targutai, and he decided the boy was turning into exactly the threat he had feared back when he abandoned the family. He rode out, captured Temujin, and locked him into a kangwe, a heavy wooden collar that pinned his arms flat and made eating or sleeping without help nearly impossible. Targutai marched him from camp to camp as a trophy, showing him off as proof of Taichiud's strength. During a feast celebrating a full moon, the guards drank themselves loose, and Temujin swung the collar into one man's skull, knocked him out, and ran for the Onan River. He waded in and submerged himself to the chin, the collar keeping just his face above the surface, while search parties combed the banks with torches. A man from the Soldis clan named Sorkin Shira spotted him but said nothing and walked on. That night, Sorkin Shira hid him inside a cart loaded with raw wool, and once the search died down, sent him off with a horse, a bow, 2 arrows, and a pot of cooked mutton. Sorkin Shira's own sons, Chilaun and Chimbai, later left their father's camp to join Temujin permanently, becoming 2 of his most trusted commanders. One act of mercy from a stranger who owed him nothing kept the entire future of the Mongol Empire alive. Temujin found his way back to his mother's camp and rebuilt what he could with a handful of loyal followers. A few years later, he traveled back to collect his promised bride, Börte, along with a dowry coat made of black sable fur. He carried that coat straight to Toghrul, Khan of the Karite tribe and an old sworn brother of his father, and offered it as a gift with nothing attached but respect. Toghrul accepted him as something close to an adopted son, tying the last surviving heir of a broken clan to one of the strongest kingdoms on the steppe. That bond mattered within the year. Merkit raiders struck the camp before dawn, in payback for an old grudge, since Yesugei had once stolen Holan from a Merkit tribesman named Chiledu before Temujin was even born. The raiders dragged Börte away. Temujin fled on foot to Burkhan Khaldun, a mountain he credited for the rest of his life with saving him that night, and from its slopes he sent riders to both Toghrul and Jamukha, his childhood Anda, asking for help. Their combined force, close to 40,000 riders by some counts in the secret history, tracked the Merkit camps along the Selenga River and overran them. Börte came home. Their first son, Yochi, was born close enough to the rescue that his parentage was whispered about for the rest of his life, and Temujin never publicly addressed it. For close to a year and a half after that raid, Temujin and Jamukha camped together as sworn brothers, sharing command of a following that kept growing. But their idea of leadership pulled them apart. Jamukha believed a man's rank came from his bloodline. Temujin promoted whoever could fight, track, or lead, no matter how poor or low-born they started out. One evening while moving camp, Jamukha suggested they pitch tents near the mountains for the herders and near the river for the shepherds, a line that Temujin's mother read as a coded insult about rank and standing. Families started drifting from Jamukha's side to Temujin's over the following weeks, and Jamukha noticed exactly who was leaving. In 1187, Jamukha struck first, catching Temujin's smaller force at a place called Dalan Baljut and beating it badly. According to the secret history, Jamukha had a group of captured chieftains executed in 70 cauldrons of boiling water, a punishment built to send a message across the whole steppe about what happened to his enemies. Temujin survived the battle and pulled his surviving followers back into the hills. For roughly a decade after, he barely appears in the historical record at all. What's known is that he spent those years absorbing smaller clans one by one and gathering the men who would later run his armies. A young herder named Börte joined him after helping track down a band of horse thieves and stayed as one of his closest commanders for the next 40 years. A blacksmith's son named Jelme arrived as a gift from his own father, wrapped in a marten skin cradle blanket, and grew into one of Temujin's most trusted generals. 2 former enemy soldiers, Jebe and Subutai, switched sides after losing battles against him and went on to lead campaigns that reached as far as the Caucasus and the Adriatic Sea decades later. None of these men came from noble houses. All of them came from the wreckage of Temujin's worst years, which was exactly the point. One low point from that stretch survived in Mongol memory. After a defeat by a coalition of rival tribes, Temujin retreated to the muddy waters of Lake Baljuna with a small band of followers, down to a handful of men from different clans and even different faiths, Christian, Muslim, and shamanist among them. With no proper food left, they drank the lake's muddy water together and swore loyalty to each other regardless of tribe or religion. Historians still argue over the exact details, but the story stuck because it captured something real about how Temujin built his base, not on shared blood, but on men who chose to stay when everything else had fallen apart. By the early 1200s, Temujin had crushed the Tatars who killed his father, defeated the Naimans in the west, and finally turned on both of his old allies. Toghrul's son tried to ambush him near the Kalakaljid sands and lost, sending Toghrul fleeing into Naiman territory, where he was killed by a border guard who failed to recognize the old Khan. Jamukha lasted a little longer. Betrayed by his own generals, he was dragged before Temujin in chains. Temujin offered him a chance to rejoin as a brother, one more time. Jamukha refused and asked for a death without spilled blood, in keeping with steppe custom for men of rank, and Temujin granted it. In 1206, at the source of the Onan River, the surviving chiefs of the steppe gathered for a Kurultai and raised a nine-tailed white banner over Temujin's tent. They declared him ruler of every Mongol tribe and gave him the title Genghis Khan. He was 44 years old, and the empire that would eventually stretch to the Pacific Ocean hadn't started yet. The scattered clans that once left a 9-year-old boy to starve on the riverbank now answered to him under a single law code and a single banner. Everything people know him for, the sieges, the conquest of half the known world, the empire the size of Africa, comes after this moment. What got him to that riverbank in 1206 was a childhood spent starving, a wooden collar around his neck, and a handful of people who could have killed him and chose not to. That part of the story rarely makes the highlight reel. It's the part that actually explains the rest.
Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on even more stories.